Hello and welcome to This Life of Mine, the show where our guests pick the places, people, possessions, music and memories that have made them who they are. My guest today is a historian, a philosopher, and one of the most successful non-fiction authors of recent times. His books have sold over 45 million copies, and fans of his work include, frankly, some of the most powerful people on planet Earth. When he's not writing bestsellers and influencing global conversations, he's a history lecturer at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a distinguished research fellow at the University of Cambridge's Centre for the Study of Existential Risk. For any of us who have ever lain awake at night wondering what on earth the future holds for humanity, our guest today just might have some of the answers. Are you ready?
Yes.
Then take us away.
I'm Yuval Noah Harari, and welcome to This Life of Mine.
I was thinking on my way in today about when I last saw you, which was a couple of summers ago. I saw you give a wonderful talk with Alan de Botton.
Yeah.
You and Alan de Botton were talking and you said something that really stuck with me. You said that in this room where you were talking, it's important to say there was a lot of big CEOs and world leaders and things like that. And you said that you felt that all big public companies should give up a board seat to a philosopher. Have you had any phone calls from any of these big companies? And has anyone, as far as you know, taken you up on this great advice?
No, and actually I'm not a philosopher myself, so it's not a job for me.
Yeah, but you'd be pretty good in those rooms, wouldn't you?
I'm not sure. I think my husband is much better at business than I am.
Tell me why you think that would be an important thing for a company to do, because I do think it's a good idea.
Because ultimately the impact of the products the company produces comes from the interaction with people. So if you're a tech company, you need to understand not just computers, you also need to understand people. And for that, you need to understand history and philosophy and things like that, and psychology. And, especially tech companies, they sometimes think they are exempt from history, but they are not. They are just part of it like everything else.
Go on, in what way would you say they think they're exempt from history? That's interesting.
For instance, we had thousands of years of experience with things like don't steal. And they come and say, this doesn't apply to us because information is different. So we can take your information and sell it to third parties without your permission. And this is not stealing. And this is basically taking thousands of years of history and saying, well, it doesn't apply to us.
Because at the very core of it, that really is the main business model of lots of these companies, right? That's it.
And similarly, we have lots of experience before when a new information technology comes along, like the printing press. Very quickly you realize that unless you regulate it, you get a flood of lies and conspiracy theories and fake news and social disturbances. People say, the printing press, it brought about the scientific revolution. Well, not exactly. It first of all brought about a wave of wars of religion and witch hunts. The biggest bestsellers of the early years of print were not scientific books like Copernicus on astronomy. It was witch hunting manuals teaching people about the great conspiracy of witches against mankind and how to identify and kill witches by do it yourself, basically.
And yet now we find ourselves basically back in the same place, right?
If you think that what you're doing is completely new, completely unprecedented, unconnected to anything that happened previously, then you think that you're exempt from it. 20
years ago now, I was in a play called The History Boys, which was about a group of boys being prepped and groomed to get into Oxford and Cambridge to do a history degree. And there was a really famous line in the play, and I wonder if you would agree with this. It just made me think of it when you were talking then. They're doing a mock exam, like an interview exam for Oxford or Cambridge, and the teacher says, how would you describe history? And he says, history is just one fucking thing after the other. Would you agree with that?
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
But I think that it's not just one thing. That's a big problem because people often fall into the kind of single cause fallacy that one thing caused the war, and it's never one thing. History turns into mythology when you think it's just one thing leading to another thing.
Right.
Then you think that, for instance, I don't know, the origin of the United States is just the heritage of England.
Sure.
And of course, the heritage of England is extremely important for the United States, but it's also influenced by the heritage of so many other cultures and places. So it's never just a single cause.
This is already going to be one of my favourite shows we've done. I can already feel it. On This Life of Mine, we've asked you to pick a person, a possession, a place, a book, a memory, and a piece of music. And we're going to start with music.
Okay.
And it's not what I expected.
What did you
of
think?
A world-renowned historian. I don't know. I think this is probably
What was your expectation?
Some obscure piece of classical music that I'd never heard of. And yet,
this doesn't fit the bill?
Well, I guess it is a classic. I mean, share with us the piece of music that you've chosen as significant in your life.
Save a Prayer by Duran Duran. I was 6 years old in 1982, and I saw the video on Israeli television. I think it's in Sri Lanka.
Right.
And they visit like these archaeological Buddhist sites. It really kind of blew my mind. Strangely enough, Buddhism afterwards played a very, very important role in my life. And when I tried to look back, when was the first time in my life I saw an image of the Buddha or of Buddhist monks? It was in Duran Duran's Save a Prayer. You know, it's a bit strange to say it about the Duran Duran song, but it made me realize how huge and amazing the world is. Which is a very strange connection to make, I know.
No,
but
I understand, yeah.
They just made me realize the world is so big.
How much of a role does music play in your day-to-day life?
At the moment, I guess not a very big role because I don't have much time.
But I guess the reason I ask is I know that a lot of your meditation is a huge part of your life.
Yeah.
Is it true you go away every year to a sort of silent retreat? Is that every year or every few years?
Every year I go to a long retreat between 30 and 60 days.
And this is on your own?
I'm in a meditation center, so there are other people there.
Yes.
But it's basically just me with myself meditating.
And what's the benefits of that? Of 30 to 60 days of silent meditation? What's the benefits?
You get to know yourself.
Right.
I mean, it's the most interesting thing in the world to get to know your own mind, because everything else you experience in life, you experience through your mind. And to understand where thoughts come from, where emotions come from, what are emotions, what is anger, what is boredom. Like sometimes you get a day of boredom or a week of boredom on the meditation retreat, and boredom is one of the hardest things to deal with. A lot of things in life are driven by boredom. People change jobs, leave relationships because of boredom.
Yes.
The most misunderstood word in American English is excited. They seem to think that it's a good word. Like, I'm excited to meet you. The new book is so exciting.
Yes.
And sometimes excitement is good, but something to know about organic beings is that we live by cycles. If you keep an organic entity excited all the time, it collapses and dies. To some extent, you can say that this is now true of the whole of our society. It suffers from too much excitement. We need more boring politicians, for instance.
For sure.
We need more boring times. And the problem is not the excitement, it's the boredom. If you don't know how to deal with boredom, you will be constantly chasing the next exciting thing, ramping up things more and more and more until you collapse.
Is it true that when you went to one of the retreats that you went on, you went in before the 2016 American election?
Yeah.
So when you came out, you had no idea that Donald Trump had been elected the president of the United States?
Yes, I think that the retreat started on the 1st of November.
Right.
It was a 45 days retreat, so until the 15th of December. So kind of, I didn't miss anything.
That's one way to come out of a meditation retreat, though, isn't it?
I mean, I earned something like 30 days in a world in which Donald Trump is not the president of the United States.
Let's move on to your memory, because interestingly, your memory took place in the same year that the piece of music that you chosen was released.
Apparently an important year in my life.
Well, clearly. Tell us the memory that you wanted to talk about on the show today.
So the memory is the sinking of the Sheffield, of the warship Sheffield, during the Falklands War in 1982. It happened halfway across the world, and it's really my first historical memory. It's again the realization that there is a very big world out there which is not about me and my family and my school and my neighborhood.
You were 6 years old.
I was 6 years old, and I was watching the news. And there was one thing that really kind of shook me, that they showed an interview with one of the crew members who died in the attack, in the sinking of the ship. And of course, the interview was done before. And then they reported that the ship sank, and they show a footage of the ship. And then they have this interview, and he's dead. I remember kind of struggling with, but he's dead. I mean, how am I able to he's now talking, and he's dead. And maybe it was really this interview with this dead person, which kind of shook me.
Do you think this would have informed your life, and these are the first times that you perhaps even considered the idea of being a historian?
It could be. I mean, my favorite book at the time was A History of the World for children. In a way, it goes back to your first question about history as a chain of events, one damn thing after the other, that you realize that there are so many things happening at the same time, all of them influencing you, that this basic question of why is the world the way it is, it has no simple kind of mythological answer as an origin story. Like, in mythology, when they try to explain why the world is the way it is, they usually tell you just, there is a single reason that explains why we drink tea or why we play football like this or whatever. And in history, it's never like that. You have the combination of so many different things from all over the world. I didn't think like that when I was 6.
Well, that was my point, because that's what I was trying to think of. Because I know that I think it was when you were around 8 or 9, if I'm right in thinking, that you were identified as gifted.
Yeah.
And you were moved to a different school, a school specifically for bright students.
Which was horrible.
Why?
Absolutely horrible.
As someone who this will never happen to be singled out as gifted.
For you.
Go on, why was it horrible? Tell me why.
Because you had all these very smart kids picked from different schools, but then brought together, which was like a Darwinian nightmare.
Right. How many students are we talking in this
school? Like 30 students.
Okay.
And, you come from a place, like in your old school, you are the smartest kid around. This is your identity. I'm the smart kid. And they picked you because you're the smart kid. And then they throw you in the arena with 29 other very smart kids, and suddenly you're not the smartest kid around. And the entire program is built around these are gifted students, so we need to kind of nurture their intellect and so forth. So all the emphasis was again on the intellect. Like social skills were neglected, physical skills, sports were neglected. It's all about the intellect. And then you're in this double bind that your entire identity more and more is about the intellect, but you're surrounded by other very smart kids. So it's very hard to distinguish yourself intellectually. And then it becomes like this gladiatorial fight.
I was going to say, is it competitive?
It was the most competitive place I've ever been in the world.
Wow.
One of the things I learned from there is the intellect is vastly overrated in human society. And it has its usages, but if you ask me what is the most overrated thing about humans, except for excitement, it's the intellect.
And what's the most underrated?
Ooh. I think we should value a broad set of skills.
Yes.
That every time we kind of focus on just one thing, it's a mistake. Like you have this classical, it's a very simplistic way, but thinking about it, that you have the head and the heart and the hands, you need all three.
Right.
If you have a human with just a head, not a good idea. So you need to invest roughly the same, or at least in a balanced way, in your head, in your intellect, in your heart, in your social and emotional skills, and in your hands, in your physical and motor skills. And this is especially true today, with all the AI revolution and so forth, that people constantly ask, so what should we focus on? Don't focus on one thing. Like if a couple of years ago they told people, okay, focus on learning how to code computers because they will need a lot of coders. They will not need all these other professions, but coding, this is the future. Now AI codes better than people. In 5 or 10 years, maybe there is no job whatsoever for coders. And we don't know what will be the job market like in 20 years. So if you place all your bets on just one set of skills, this is a bad idea.
But yet school, so I have 3 young children. My children are 13, 9 and 6. Centuries ago, or decades ago, whenever it was, there was a moment in time where if you were young, it was absolutely necessary that you were taught to churn butter. If you couldn't churn butter, you couldn't survive, right?
Yeah.
And then there must have been an overlap where people were learning to churn butter, but butter was readily available in the shops. But it was like, no, but it's necessary that you learn this. And then as we evolved, we were like, well, you don't really need to learn that anymore because look, it happens here and you can buy it. And I feel that looking at this generation now, I look at some of what my children are learning and syllabuses and all these things, and I think, oh, God, I don't know if this is ever going to be necessary.
Because history is accelerating. What you described earlier, happening over generations, even centuries, it now happens within a few years.
Yeah.
It becomes more and more difficult to know what to teach young people because nobody has any clue how the world and specifically the job market would look like in 2050.
I wouldn't mind it at all if my kids' teachers said, look, we don't know what to teach you, but we can teach you about compassion and empathy and love and understanding and a way of treating each other, which feels invisible in their syllabus.
Yeah, I think emotional intelligence and social intelligence are the safest bets.
Yeah.
They are going to need it even more and more because in a very excited world where everything is accelerating, the psychological pressure is increasing dramatically. So we will need the most kind of psychologically robust and flexible generation ever to deal with what's coming in the next 20 or 30 years. And we already have a mental health crisis, certainly after COVID and after all that. So we should definitely invest more in that, which is, of course, difficult. It's much easier to teach dates in history or equations in physics than teaching people emotional skills, how to deal with failure or how to deal with other people.
We're going to come to some of this later also. So I'm conscious to move on because you actually just mentioned him very briefly there. Let's move on to the person that you wanted to talk about. Tell us the person you've chosen as significant in your life.
Charles Darwin. His work shaped not just my scientific views, but on a much deeper level. For instance, I'm gay, and I think that Charles Darwin in many ways was a prophet of gay liberation. It basically tells people that anything that exists is in line with the laws of nature. And that there are no purposes in biology. There are only causes. Like the idea, for instance, that sex exists for a particular purpose. And if you use it for any other purpose, this is a sin or this is a violation of the laws of nature. Darwin comes along and says, nonsense. Biology was not created by any creator God with purposes. We know how things evolved. This is the theory of evolution. And in evolution, there are no purposes. Things evolve because of certain reasons, certain causes, but they never have a purpose. What animals do with their capabilities, with their bodies, change all the time. Wings originally evolved as a way for lizards to warm themselves. Wings and feathers.
I didn't know that.
You're a lizard, it's cold in Britain, and you warm yourself with your feathers. And then at a certain point, when something chases you and you run away, you leap, and it gives you a little bit ahead of the predator. Your life is saved. And generation after generation, this ability develops until you fly. Now, you can't come to birds and tell them, no, this was not the purpose for which feathers and wings evolved. You should use this thing only in order to keep yourself warm. If you are using your feathers to fly, you are violating the laws of nature. This is nonsense. And it's the same with sex. Yes, sex originally evolved in the context of procreation. But over millions of years, evolutionary processes, not just among humans, also among many other mammals and animals used sex to, for instance, cement social relationships and create intimacy and create friendships and partnerships and relieve tensions. Most sex, for instance, among chimpanzees is not for the creation of little apes. And it's the same with humans.
It's the same with us,
And it's natural.
Yeah.
This link, which actually comes from Christian theology, the purpose of sex, God said that sex is only for procreation. So any sex which is not for procreation, this is a sin and this is against nature. Darwin comes along and says this is all nonsense.
Well, and the creation of marriage, something which I think I'm right. I think you'll know, but I think I'm right. Really, the creation of marriage was for the carving up of various
Property.
land rights.
Yeah, and who gets the land?
Stem the desire of women. But here we are now. I'm very happily married, but it is a strange concept if you think about it, that the idea of saying till death us do part.
This originally was said in a time when people lived to be 40.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, this is the issue all about. Alan de Botton, actually, we spoke about at the start of the show, has a wonderful, wonderful book about love where he says all of our references to love are from 18th century poets who then informed the songs that we've listened to. It was, how do I compare thee to a summer's day? Diphtheria, dead at 39. Like the idea, no one really wrote, he says it brilliantly in his book, he says no one wrote a love song about someone who consistently leaves a wet towel on the floor, and what is love and what is it? And that's so interesting that you look at Charles Darwin in that way. That's amazing.
Basically, what Darwin is saying is that anything that exists is in line with the laws of nature. All this talk about this is against nature. If it was against nature, it couldn't exist. What is against nature? Like running faster than the speed of light, as far as we know, is against nature. Nobody ever made a law forbidding that people would run faster than the speed of light, because you can't. It's not like you run faster than the speed of light and then some galactic cop shows up and gives you a ticket. Hey, you violated the laws of nature. You should pay this fine. You just can't. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that anything that is natural is also good. People can say, murder is natural.
Yes.
But you cannot ban something on the ground that it's not natural, because there are no such things. If you want to ban something, you need to come up with a better explanation. We ban murder not because it's against the laws of nature, but because it causes terrible suffering to people. You can't ban homosexuality because it's against the laws of nature. Find a better excuse. Now, if you say, well, it causes suffering to people, no, it doesn't.
But this, I think, also comes back into the way that we are consuming so many things now, media, the idea that for so much online media, hate is the only viable business model. So that will generate more ad revenue and all these things. So the stoking of fires.
That's Darwin again.
Yeah, that's what
Darwin tells us, this comes from evolution. That if you live in the African savannah hundreds of thousands of years ago, so you're constantly on the lookout. If you miss something benign, nothing bad happens to you. But if you miss something dangerous, like a predator, or like somebody from a different tribe who is ambushing you and trying to kill you, then you're dead.
Yeah.
So we are primed to focus attention on dangerous and frightening things. And now this evolutionary mechanism, it's now being hijacked by social media algorithms against us. They constantly show us conspiracy theories and fake news about things that could destroy us. And we are hooked on it.
I read something just last week where a climate activist was saying that the biggest challenge facing the message that they're trying to get across and trying to spread to as many people as they can is that people have no interest in reading good stories about climate change and evolution. So if there's a story about a small village in, I'm making this up, in Norway or Sweden who have managed to harness a natural energy and it is now powering a huge amount of this small town, and it could be done on a larger scale, and this could really combat climate change, it may be read by 300 people. And yet if there was a story about how the world is going to end in 20 years' time and the world is going to be on fire and everything is awful, it will be read by 3 million people. And it's the idea that we don't even want to read good stories about these things. We are only attracted to bad stories.
Again, because this is evolutionarily, it made sense. Because you need to pay attention to the dangers much more than to the good news. Again, if you have a tree full of ripe fruit and there is a snake there, you need to pay attention to the snake, not to all the ripe fruit. So if you have all these good stories and you have this one scary story, you will pay attention to the scary story.
Let's move on to your book.
So it's Guns, Germs and Steel by Jared Diamond, which is a big history of humankind. And he explains tens of thousands of years of human history over entire continents from an ecological and biological perspective. This, again, really changed my understanding of history and of the world, but it was also the model for my writing. When I came to write Sapiens, then later my other books and my new book, Nexus, so I looked to Jared Diamond to understand you can actually write such books. It's possible to write a book about thousands of years of human history. Because, when I studied history in university, almost all the books were about very limited subjects, like about one person, one battle, just the changes in the family structure in late medieval England after the Black Death, an entire book. Which is very important because this is the basis for all our historical knowledge, these very in-depth studies that somebody spent 5 years, 10 years in archives all over England just to research that. But what I was missing is then somebody taking all these pixels and putting them together to give us a big picture.
Your new book, Nexus, which is, to give it its full title, Nexus, A Brief History of Information Networks from the Stone Age to AI. You really have an amazing, I think your greatest skill for me, for someone who so much of what you say, I'm just trying to keep up. But you have an amazing way often of just describing things in a way which makes me, and I think many, many others go, oh, I get it. And in the book, you compare humans creating artificial intelligence to the story of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, which many people know thanks to Mickey Mouse in the Fantasia. Can you explain what you meant by that and what those similarities are?
Well, in the Sorcerer's Apprentice, Mickey Mouse, or the apprentice, creates or enchants a broomstick to bring water, but then loses control over it. And the enchanted broomstick floods the whole workshop. And this is, of course, a very old cautionary tale. And we are now basically doing the same thing, but on a much, much bigger scale. We are not just enchanting broomsticks to bring water, but to fight wars, to manage our finance, to manage our relationships. It has enormous positive potential, like to provide people with the best healthcare in history, but also very, very dangerous potential if this thing gets out of our control. And the most important thing to understand is that AI is different from every previous technology in history because it's not a tool, it's an agent.
Right.
A tool is something that it's in your hands, you use it, you decide how to use it. An atom bomb is a tool. You need a human being to decide to bomb Hiroshima. An AI is not a tool. It's an agent. It makes decisions by itself. It can create new ideas by itself. It can, for instance, decide by itself. An autonomous weapon system can decide by itself to bomb a certain city. And it can even invent new kinds of bombs, new kinds of military strategies that never occurred to any human. Now, there is a lot of hype around AI, So now everything is AI. Like whenever they try to sell you something, they say it's AI.
Yes.
Like this is an AI table. This is an AI glass. So not every automatic machine is an AI. If you think, for instance, about a vending machine that sells you tea and coffee and stuff like that, this is not AI. This is just an automatic machine. It doesn't decide anything by itself. It's pre-programmed by humans to do everything that it's doing. Like you press the espresso button, so it's pre-programmed to prepare you an espresso in a certain way. A vending machine will become an AI if when you, in the morning, you come to the machine tells you, "Hello, James, I think you would like a double espresso with 1 sugar because I've analyzed your patterns from the previous year and I think I know what you like." This is an AI. It learned something by itself. It made decisions by itself. And it's really an AI if it then tells you, and actually, I have something new to offer to you. I've just invented a new drink called Boffee. I think it's better than coffee, and I think you like it. This is an AI. Think about a world which is increasingly populated. Again, it's not like the Hollywood scenario of one big evil computer trying to take over the world. It's millions and millions of agents everywhere, AI bureaucrats, AI soldiers, AI bankers, who make decisions about us and invent new bombs, new medicines, new financial devices, new whatever. I hear people compare it to previous information technologies like, I don't know, the printing press. It's not a printing press. A printing press only copied our ideas. It never created a single new line of text. AI today constantly create a lot of new texts. Many of them are not so good, but many of my texts are not good. Humans constantly create far from ideal texts. But there are many new texts in the world which did not come out of a human mind and a human imagination. And the same with images, the same is music. And really, we haven't seen anything yet. I mean, the AI revolution is what, like 10 years old? It's nothing. It's the first baby steps. Again, if we go back to Darwin, so he describes a process of evolution that took billions of years to get from the first microorganisms to reptiles and birds and dinosaurs and humans. We are now at the beginning of an parallel evolutionary process which is inorganic. And the AIs of today, they're like the microorganisms. The very, very first, the amoebas of an evolutionary process that could continue for thousands, millions of years. And it's much faster. Inorganic entities like AI, they never need to rest. They never need to sleep.
Yes.
They're on all the time. They move much faster.
They don't have a bad day.
Maybe they do, but
they don't have a cold.
No.
They don't have a sore throat and don't feel in the mood for it today.
Not yet, at least. Yes.
Yes.
And they develop much, much faster. It could take perhaps just a few decades to get from the AI amoebas of today to the AI T-Rex in 2050 or 2100. Now, if ChatGPT is the amoeba, how do you think AI T-Rex would look like?
That's what I find terrifying, is I try to explain to friends of mine that what we're dealing with now is sort of the early days of like AOL
very, very
dial-up,
early.
when you'd get the beep, boop, beep, 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 to go. Like, that's what we're dealing with now.
Yeah.
And look how fast it felt like the internet is now just in your pocket and you can't live without it. Let's move on to your place.
Yeah.
I'm keen to talk to you about this. Tell me the place that you've chosen to talk about today.
So I actually mentioned it already in some way. It's the Dhamma Meditation Center. So I was doing my PhD in Oxford at the time in history and feeling very, very miserable. Again, because I was stuck in my intellect all the time. And, you know, all the books and all the articles I was reading, none of them had any answers to the really big questions. And this friend nagged me for a year, why not just go for a meditation retreat? And I thought this was some kind of mystical mumbo jumbo.
Yes.
It's not for me. And eventually, what really drew me was the promise of silence. 10 days of complete silence, okay, I'll go.
Right.
And it really blew my mind. as I was sitting there on the first day, hearing this simple instruction, just observe your breath coming in and out. Again, I was expecting some kind of, this mystical theory about energies and whatever, circulating, nothing. This was his most practical, down-to-earth instruction. Just feel your breath going into the nostril and out. And this was the entire 10 days. It was instructions like no mysticism whatsoever. And I was really amazed by how little I knew about myself and that I can't control, like my attention, even for a few seconds. And this was the beginning of a journey of exploration, not with books and articles and intellectual pursuits, but with direct observation, which is, again, goes back to Charles Darwin and to basic science. If you want to really understand something, books are nice, but direct observation is essential. And to directly observe my own mind and body at work for 10 days, this was really a life-changing experience.
Is it just overwhelming being in your mind, thinking about big issues, big subjects facing humanity all the time? How overwhelming is that for you? And is that why you think you take such solace in these moments at the Dharma Deepa Meditation Center?
No, I think worries are like gas. They expand to fill whatever space you give them. So if you manage a small grocery store or a country, it's the same in a way. As much space as you give it in your mind, the worries will expand to fill it. One thing I learned from meeting all kinds of CEOs and politicians, they are ordinary people just like everybody else. This is important to remember. For instance, I just watched this, there was this in the UK, this debate about whether the Prime Minister should go on vacation or not. Obviously he should go on vacation. He's a human being. I don't want any country to be managed by people who never go on vacation, who don't have time to relax, to think. Part of the problem, and we go back to it again and again in this conversation, is we are basically carbon animals in a silicon world. Organic beings, whether you're prime minister or whether you're amoeba, you live by cycles, day and night, winter and summer, excitement and rest. And now more and more of the systems in the world, they are not run by human beings. They are run by these inorganic silicon entities that never need to rest. And they increasingly expect us to adapt to them. Like the news cycle is 24 hours a day.
It's madness.
It's madness. The political cycle is all the time. Think even about Wall Street. Wall Street was created by human beings. So Wall Street goes on vacation. The market is open, I think, only Mondays to Fridays, like 8 or 8:30 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Friday, it shuts down until Monday morning. So if a new war breaks out in the Middle East at 5 minutes past 4 on Friday, too bad, the market will react only on Monday morning.
You're absolutely right. That never crossed my mind.
And this is a good thing.
Yes.
But this is changing. Because when the computers and the algorithms take over, they never need to rest. They don't need to go to sleep. They don't take vacations. They're on all the time. And when this happens, it forces us to be on all the time. And this is destructive. Like there was recently a research about comparing different professions in terms of mental health. And politicians came last. And this is very bad news.
Yes.
Because if the people that make the most important decisions, they suffer most from mental health issues, anxieties, depression, burnout, this is a very bad news.
You're absolutely right, because if, let's say, tomorrow morning we both wake up to hear that the president of a country or the prime minister, their schedule is leaked, and it's said from 12 midday till 12:40 they would meditate.
They took a nap.
There would be an outrage. he sits in silence for 40 minutes a day and without any of us going, well, no, that would be an amazing thing.
Yeah.
You would argue it should be necessary for all world leaders
to take a break every now and then.
And think about really what they want to do and not make knee-jerk reactions to things and not be burnt out and to have a presence of mind.
And that's true of CEOs, and that's true of everybody. And the problem is, it's no longer a personal decision. It's really the system doesn't allow it. Again, we are these organic animals, and we've created these digital silicon systems that now the question is, who will adapt to whom? Okay, a basic Darwinian question, who adapts? And increasingly, it is we who have to adapt to them instead of these algorithms and computers adapting to us.
Right.
And this is very bad news for us.
We're going to move on to your possession. I was intrigued as to what you might choose. I don't know how much significance you give to possessions in your life or not, but I think this is a very sweet way to end your selections. Tell us the possession that you've chosen for the show today.
So it's my morning porridge pot. My usual breakfast is porridge, usually from oats, but sometimes from all kinds of semolina or whatever. And it's like my morning ritual. When I wake up, the first thing I do, I meditate for 1 hour, and then I make breakfast. And for years and years, I'm making the same breakfast.
What time do you wake up in the morning?
Usually sometime between 6 and 7:30.
Right.
And then I'll go and take out my morning porridge pot and I make porridge. And it's been with me for, I think, at least 10 years. And it's such an insignificant possession. But in a way, I interact with it every day.
Right.
It has no lid. It had a lid. When it was born with a lid, of course, but then it got broken.
Okay.
So, and I could have switched to a different pot with a proper lid, but I didn't. I just kept this lidless porridge pot. And I use all kinds of other lids from other pots, and it works well. And it's just, it's been there for so long. It really functions in a way as a kind of ritual. And rituals are important. They give you some kind of ground of stability in life.
This is a pot you take on the road with you? I mean, so you travel a lot?
No. I don't go to extreme. It's at home.
Oh, that's really ruined it for me. I really thought... I thought that this, you have this pot that's in your suitcase.
No. This would be bizarre.
Before we end the show, we've talked a lot about worries and the future of humanity and artificial intelligence. I'm wondering could we end the show on a hopeful note?
Yeah.
As when you think now about the future of humanity, what gives you hope?
AI is nowhere near its full development, its full capacity, but the same is true of the human mind. We still understand very little of it. We still utilize just a small part of its capabilities. If for every minute and every dollar that we invest in developing AI, we will also invest a minute and a dollar in developing our own minds, we will be okay.
Yuval Noah Harari, your music is Save a Prayer by Duran Duran. Your memory is the sinking of the HMS Sheffield in the Falklands War in 1982. Your person is Charles Darwin. Your book is Guns, Germs and Steel by Jared Diamond. Your place is the Dharma Dippa Meditation Center in the United Kingdom. And your possession is your morning porridge pot. Thank you so much for sharing this life of yours. What a joy.
Thank you.
Up next is this.
I am Diane von Furstenberg, and I welcome you to this life of mine. My mother was liberated from concentration camp. She weighed 49 pounds, and the doctor said she absolutely cannot get pregnant. Her child will not be normal. And sure enough, less than a year later, I was born, and in a sense, I was not normal.
What is it about the wrap dress?
The fabric is super comfortable, but it's tight. It immediately awakens your body language, and something happens, and therefore a woman feels confident. It's the dress that the men like and their mothers don't mind.
Ah, that's okay.
So it's proper enough and sexy enough. If men do certain things, why can't women do? And if I would come to LA and I would go out with one movie star one night and another one another night, you know, it was like going hunting.
Would you like to do a quick fire round?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Favorite room in your house?
My meditation room.
Year you would like to time travel to?
I'm happy where I am.
Favorite film?
Out of Africa.
Best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Observe your breath.
What's the best piece of advice you would like to share with others?
Go on an information diet.
Go on, what do you mean by that?
Go on an information diet. The same way people go on food diets. Go on an information diet. Be very mindful of the food you give your mind, which is the information you consume.
Go on an information diet. I need to go on both.